I think the cool thing is if you speak about the narrative of heavy metal in its totality to someone, especially someone who you would deem to be this completely reasonable human being with like a 9-to-5 job who probably makes twice as much as any of us do. You start realizing that what you're trying to sell to someone is a bunch of magic.
Greetings, Legion, and welcome to episode 268 of Into the Necrosphere. For the last 3 years, I have been raving almost non-stop about the debut record by Philadelphia's own Daeva. That album, of course, through sheer will and black magic, it came out in 2022 on $20 spin. I finally got to sit down with not one, not two, but 3 members of the band. They spoke to me at length about the band's construction and formation, how they write, their influences. We also got into some professional wrestling talk. So it is a tremendously enjoyable 1-hour conversation that's going to be coming your way very shortly. But before we get to that, we need to set the mood, and who better to do so on an episode like this one than Lord Humungous. Their debut record, Raped by the Nukes, was released independently on December the 16th, 2023. For your listening pleasure, this is them now with a track called White Line Nightmare.
Mother
Lord Humungous off their debut album. The song is called White Line Nightmare. The debut record, Raped by the Nukes, released independently in December of 2023. Technically speaking, they are no longer Unsanctioned Filth because they have signed to Gem's label, and you would hope that they put out a new album very soon. But that record is definitely one worth checking out. As always, I'll post their link or their Bandcamp link in the description to the podcast. If you head over there and you buy yourself some music, you let them know who it was who sent you. Friends, you may be new to the podcast, and if so, allow me to remind you that I am a very proud and card-carrying member of the Horsemen of the Podcasting Apocalypse. We are dedicated to filling your week with the very highest quality entertainment from Monday to Sunday, and we kick off every Monday with Brandon Legion hosting another episode of Horrible 666. Yours truly casts hexes and slays poses on Into the Necrosphere every Tuesday, and then every Wednesday we've got Sensei Mike Hill of the band Tombs giving you another installment of Everything Went Black. We also double your pleasure on a Wednesday because Cheyenne of the band Trivax comes your way with another episode of Iblis Manifestations. On a Thursday, the great Mike Hill returns alongside his co-hosts, the outlaw Mike Scondado and the professor Jeff Kashid. They review new and old horror movies by way of one of my favorite podcasts of the week, Necromaniacs. On the topic of movies, coming up later on in the show on the News Rant, I'm going to talk to you guys about one of my favorite movies of the year so far. As a matter of fact, a movie that I think will be the best movie of 2025 unless something absolutely extraordinary happens between now and December the 31st. That movie, of course, is Warfare. We'll get to that later on in the show. But finally, just to wrap up the Horseman scheduling, we also have on a Thursday and again on a Sunday, the Sinister Minister, the Reverend Carl Hikara, taking you on a curated journey through the dark, the weird, the arcane, and the esoteric with his podcast, Soul Knox. I mentioned the News Rant. Do stick around for that when I'm done talking to the gentleman from Daeva, because we're listening to a ton of new music, including new tracks by Death Commander, Lord Belial, Vader, Cryptopsy, and more. I'm also going to offer a rebuttal to Flight of the Icarus of the YouTube channel Metal Trenches. He recently posted a posers list of the best black metal albums of the decade so far. I will provide you with a real deal. The 20 black metal albums released in this decade that you absolutely need to either own or need to actively be listening to. And that's coming up later on in the show. For now, though, my friends, sit back and enjoy as I welcome to the podcast for the first time, most definitely not the last time, Steve Jansson, Edward Gonet, and Enrique Sagarnaga of the band Daeva. Is that on the way too? Okay.
Yeah, he knows it's on right now. So.
He doesn't get the same courtesy that you guys get. So I'm going to ask him all sorts of personal shit. But I was going to say I have been raving about this band. I don't know if you guys follow the podcast, but I've been raving about this band consistently for 3 years now. And I kind of sometimes sit wondering to myself, how are more people not thinking this is the best thing on the face of the earth? Through Sheer World Black Magic blew me away. And as I said, I think, maybe aside from anything that Oculus put out over the course of the last two records, it's probably the album I talk about the most on a frequent basis. So it is great to finally have you guys here.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Now let's I think I want to probably start by there we go. Ed has just joined us now.
I made it.
Ed, how's it going?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Steve and Enrique were saying really horrible things about you right before we got started. So
we buried you.
Oh shit! Well, you forgot the dirt.
You'll see it when the full episode comes out. But I'd rather spare you the details of it now. What I was saying to them is I have been a very loud advocate of Through Sheer World and Black Magic for basically since it came out. So A, I'm very happy to have you guys on the show. But B, I kind of want to, use this use my platform to help just, people wake up to the fucking genius that's going on here. And I know you guys have got a lot of other bands that you're in as well. We'll talk about those. But this is a band whose name should be on people's lips, as far as I'm concerned. So let's just kind of go back to the beginning first and foremost, and maybe Steve, let's start with you. Your journey into metal, into getting into extreme music, like how old were you when it started? What was your first encounter with heavier music?
Heavier music? I can tell you very distinctly. I was in 6th or 7th grade, maybe, and I heard a commercial for an Ozzy Osbourne collection best of album, The Osman Cometh, and I just remember thinking the songs on the commercial sounded cool, and I was young kid, impressionable, just trying to find my way at the time, and it's very American, but I was at Walmart of all places with my mother at the time when they sold. This is back when they sold CDs and tapes, and I think the tape was like $10 as opposed to the $18 or $20 CD. So I begged my mom to buy me the tape, and she was reluctant, but she eventually caved. And that was just sort of my journey. Like the guitar right then and there, just sort of spoke to me. That was my call.
Can you remember in that ad what particular song attracted you were most drawn to?
Oh, I think it was like the chorus to maybe the song "Back on Earth" or something like that, which is like a deep cut that was unreleased from the 90s, kind of around the Osmosis era. It was just the chorus. I remember that distinctly, but I remember when I got it's funny, when I got the tape, the first track on it is a rehearsal from the 70s of Black Sabbath playing Black Sabbath. And it honestly, it made me a little uncomfortable. It was scary, but I put it down and I was like, oh, this isn't what I expected. And then I went back, and then I spent some time with it. And but yeah, I mean, I loved the songs, but the guitar playing was just it was just awe-inspiring to me.
Yeah. It's an interesting compilation, that, because I know specifically the one you're talking about, and it's kind of mostly rarities. It's not really, it's not like a traditional classic best of, which is why I was quite surprised when you said that they actually ran a TV ad for it, because, as you say, it starts with Black Sabbath, with like a rare unreleased version of it. Then there's a Peel Sessions version of War Pigs. So it's some pretty obscure stuff, at least pretty obscure recordings. Maybe not necessarily obscure songs that are on it. But that feeling of being made to feel uncomfortable and feeling slightly nervous about what you're listening to, where did that come from? Because it's been a topic of conversation on this show before. Like, a lot of us, I think, at some point in our lives had something to do with organized religion of some sort, and when you get into metal, it's liberating. But there's definitely, like, I remember hearing Painkiller for the first time and thinking, like, this is literally the sounds of hell. I mean, it's the best thing I've ever heard, but it's it sounds like the most evil shit that any human being could possibly conceive of.
Well, yeah, no, it's interesting. I grew up and my family was Methodist, I guess, for that we went to a Methodist church, but if I'm being very honest, I feel like, my mom was single for a good amount of time until, my stepdad came into the picture, who was Catholic, but that's another conversation. But we went to church, but it wasn't with any sort of, regularity. It felt just kind of, in hindsight, it was like just a sort of societal communal norm.
Yeah.
But it was always, that was, those values were definitely like instilled and ingrained in me to an extent. But it's an interesting question. I never really thought about it that much, but I definitely now, like, thinking back that far, can remember like being a little uncomfortable, but like being curious too about like darker music. And then I remember, like, it kind of fucks with you because you kind of feel like guilt and shame for like taking a liking to these things. And I can remember in like my freshman year of high school, somebody let me borrow a copy of like Serpents of the Light. And it was like, I was like, oh no, how can I like this while I'm this? But it, that quickly subsided and I abandoned that and I found my path. So
I'm about to say, dude, if you hadn't had exposure to Deicide, then Serpents of the Light is definitely going to make you feel guilt and shame if you're not already acclimatized to that sort of thing. I remember when I saw the album cover to actually really more the back cover and the song titles, and I read the lyrics for Legion the first time, and it's like the most extreme, the most aggressive, and at that time, Glenn was a dude that made you believe that everything that was coming out of his mouth, whether it was, in an interview or, on the microphone, he 100% meant every word of that.
Yeah. I mean, I was super into Slayer, like prior to that, but there was still like, it was like, once you get to like Deicide and beyond, it's sort of all bets are off.
When you get to Deicide, you realize there's a few more gears to go in this car. Yeah. We're not anywhere near top speed. So, Ed, when was that guilt and shame moment for you musically?
Ooh, I don't know. Probably when I was around 11. I guess I got into nu metal, and I think Korn, Follow the Leader was like the start for me, and I was into that stuff. And then I was hanging out with my friend Zeszek, who had an older cousin, and they were from Poland. And then through him, it was like kind of right to Mayhem, Dark Throne, and Vader, Home Country Heroes. And so I don't know, kind of like listening to like a ton of nu metal, and then like that stuff kind of at the same time, and then like slowly like less and less that stuff. And then more and more, just like we're finding just like the heavier. And we went to Catholic school, so there was a lot of guilt and shame involved with, my new CD collection.
Yeah.
And but it was too good and never going back.
I would imagine, especially as you're discovering stuff like Mayhem and Dark Throne and stuff like that, the newer acquisitions in the CD collection, they like, we can deal with Korn, but this new shit we're not so sure about.
My parents are pretty cool about it, but I do remember like my mom looking at like all the stuff and kind of being like asking me like, "Are you okay?" Like, "I'm fine, but are you okay?" And
there was. I mean, I don't know. You guys are a little bit younger than I am, but I mean, back in like the mid to late 80s, and I grew up in South Africa, so we had a lot of this well into the 90s as well. There were so many documentaries and self-help videos and things like that going around warning parents about what their kids were getting into. And if you see your son, dressing in a black T-shirt, and he's, playing, he has an interest in horror movies, and he has an interest in playing Dungeons and Dragons, and he's listening to this music, you need to immediately start to investigate what's going on in his room, blah, blah, blah. And my parents fortunately didn't, but a lot of parents really took that to heart and were fucking pretty militant about it with their kids.
Yeah. My friend, that I just mentioned, his parents, still very Catholic. Were not fans, but I mean, they still let it happen.
Didn't enjoy the Mysteries Dom Satanas. I'm shocked.
Yeah, they were a little more like openly, I don't know, not friendly about it. Whereas like my dad, I remember him like one Christmas, they got me Rain and Blood, and I remember my dad reading the titles and just thinking, that it was hilarious, and and then they gave it to me as a Christmas gift,
Yeah. Enrique, how about you? What was the journey for you?
Talking about pain and guilt and shame. It's like we're talking about being pro wrestling fans and not metal music fans.
Dude, well, you can't not be a pro wrestling fan.
There is an obvious overlap, which I've tried to articulate for years and I couldn't. And I think this is it. It's the pain, shame, and guilt. So my journey was a little different. I grew up in Bolivia, so from a young age, my parents were pretty supportive of me just getting into music. Like my mom would probably call herself a pretty musically inclined person. And when I was young, I remember taking like just little kid drum lessons, like on a snare drum. My mom loved the Police, so Copeland was like an idol, and I don't know, it kind of inspired me to kind of stick with it later on in life. So come around middle school, I'm finally like properly learning how to play a drum set and everything, and I'm starting to get more and more musically inclined. And some of my friendships in school at the time, some of them like new metal, some of them loved bands like Slayer and Manowar and Maiden and all that stuff. And I found myself immediately drawn to Iron Maiden. So like Live After Death was a huge record for me growing up. That was a big, big formative record. And the funny thing was, you know, because I grew up in this like, you know, essentially third world country, one of the primary exports of the country is bootleg media. So getting a lot of CDs and DVDs of bands and tapes and stuff like that was way more affordable and viable for someone my age coming up than a lot of kids who were probably my contemporaries in the US or elsewhere. Yeah. So, and, you know, after Maiden, it's just kind of like what Steve and Ed shared. Like there's this constant refinement of trying to find like the next heavier thing. And, you know, you find yourself listening to Slayer, then you find yourself listening to Judas Priest and Painkillers, like a different form of extremity. I also loved Kiss a lot. And even as a kid, I loved the theatrics behind Kiss. So when I started discovering like black metal and the face paint in that context and all that stuff, I really fell in love with it. I remember, I said this before, like, I randomly put on, I think it was Night Side Eclipse, just like randomly at like 2 or 3 a.m. I had finished downloading it illegally on the internet, and you know, finally got to listen to it. And you know, dead of night. And at the time, I had trouble sleeping as a kid. I still do now, but back then it was worse. And that record just blew me the fuck away. I was just like this like young high schooler just in his chair, like, you know, kind of freaking out by it, like the totality of what that record was, how it sounded, you know. And you immediately, when you get drawn into that stuff, you got to know as much about it as possible. So, yeah, you know, I had the full immersion of listening to that while I was listening to like Immortal records too, and just reading about the lore of these Norwegian teenagers blowing up churches and killing each other and all this stuff. And I was really like sucked into it pretty quickly. And because I grew up in South America, I think a band that we always kind of all paid attention to, there were two. One is Sepultura, like, you know, right above your mom's Bible on your night table, there was probably a Sepultura CD hiding in your drawer. That was kind of mandatory for anyone that, you know, I was friendly with that was in the scene at the time. And then the other one was Brujeria. And back then, you got to think, you know, all the press releases for Brujeria were about how these guys were real life drug lords and, you know, kind of like gang guys. And there was like the whole lore about the band. So word of that somehow made its way back to Bolivia too. So when Matando Güeros came out and the CDs, like the bootleg CDs were kind of floating around, they were like a big deal to get. So, and I remember, you know, we had like one rock shop, but it was kind of pricey because that stuff wasn't bootleg. It was all import. But the other way you could get CDs would be to go to just like kiosks, like, you know, magazine stands. They would also sell you pretty much any DVD or CD of music you could ever want. And if they didn't have it, they told you to come back in an hour because by then they would have it burned on a CD for you with a printed cover. So I remember asking about Matando Güeros, and the guy just acted like it was the most taboo thing in the world. He was like, I gotta go in the back, and he'd come and bring it out. And like, I gotta think, you know, whether you like a band like that anymore, right? It's not for me to say that band aged well, but I think if you're a kid in the moment at the time, and with that or any other CD, if someone hands you that under that context, you got to think that you are the coolest motherfucker in town, right? Like you have this like thing that your parents can't see. We think about the headless or the head being held on the album cover. Is that real? You don't know about it at the time, right? So I had a lot of like freak out nerd moments like that. They're mostly just kind of in private, you know, coming up. But at the same time, that coincided with me like learning how to play drums and keeping an eye on players like Igor. And then I remember at some point, thanks to the internet throughout high school, I kind of got connected to the Derek Roddy drummer forums from like the early 2000s. And that used to be a hub for anyone who wanted to kind of figure out how to play and kind of, perfect playing extreme drums. And I just remember, I think at the time you could have a conversation with like Longstreth from Origin at the time, Derek Roddy himself, when it was the peak of Hate Eternal's popularity and him being in the band, and all these other drummers who at the time were just usernames. And now I recognize a lot of them as famous drummers in contemporary, like extreme metal bands. So it was just, for me, it was like total nerdum, just like full immersion into this culture from this weird, third world perspective, and just kind of soaking in all the theatrics of it.
It's interesting to me to hear how Brujeria was received there, because I've always been a fan, and they may not produce the most sophisticated music, but I challenge anybody who has seen them live, or at least who saw them live at their peak when Juan Brujo was still alive, and when the band was at full strength, not to have had the fucking time of their lives. They were one of the heaviest bands live, but not only were they heavy, the attitude, and actually this kind of brings me to the point you made about pro wrestling. There is very much a pro wrestling element to Brujeria. Brujeria, to me, it was like they're like the ECW circa 95, 96 of death metal. I mean, just in complete and utter insanity and chaos, but at the same time extremely self-aware about it as well. Like they kind of winked at the audience. I remember you talking about the lore. Can you remember on the Assassino, the first Assassino record, they had a CD, it was actually a CD-ROM if you bought the album. And on the CD-ROM, they had this fake documentary about the authorities in Mexico investigating them. Fucking hysterical. I think you might still be able to find it on YouTube.
Yeah,
one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life. But but as I said, like initially you like, Jesus, this is really, it's done really well. It's like really grainy, and it's again they wink at you just enough so that the people that aren't complete morons are going to know these dudes are taking the piss, but it just helps add to the mystique and to the vibe.
And like, just to add to that, like you spoke about like, how did that interplay with religion, and like where I'm from, it's very Catholic, but the context of Catholicism for a lot of Bolivians is, Spanish conquistador, historical context and a lot of oppression due to it, right? We have stone churches that were made by indigenous slaves. So when you have bands like Sepultura and Brujeria talking about like what we now in 2025 call systemic oppression and all those things, racial divide and indigenous blood and what that means to people and stuff, I think that really resonated with anybody who liked that kind of subculture back then. It was really important, and the country I came from was very politically divided, like the whole time. Not to get into politics too much, but just for the context of it, there was a big divide between the indigenous people, which made up like, let's say 75% of the population, and everyone else who were the government entities in power. So even like, on the more new metal side of Sepultura with Roots, that record was huge, right? And with Brujeria, I think it's funny, like, I think you're right, like musically, it's a little silly. They're very tongue-in-cheek about what they do. But I will say that if you go back and listen to Matando Güeros or actually really any of their first three records, and you listen to what we would call now like to be the grindcore songs, those songs actually kind of rip, and they kind of sound fucked up because they're recorded really messy. Like it's I don't know. I just love the backdrop for it all.
100%. There's a grit to it that it always kept you in a state of disbelief when you were listening to it, especially when Matando Güeros came out. My favorite Brujeria song, just as a side note, Ciudad de la Mente on Brujerismo. Just so much attitude rolled up into one song. Love it. Absolutely love it. But the pro wrestling side of things. So I'm going to assume all three of you guys are pro wrestling fans or were pro wrestling fans at one point.
Yep.
Yes.
Now, in the best way you can summarize it, Enrique, what is the connection for you between pro wrestling and this music? Because you guys are the first dudes to come on the show beside my friend Cheyenne from Trivax to bring this up. So Ed and Steve, I'll get to you guys for your take in a second, but Enrique, you were the one that you tabled this notion. So
sure. I'm so sorry I did. No, no, it's funny because like there's a lot of elements of heavy metal that I take extremely seriously. And a lot of it is like the orthodox religious views on certain things, and especially this other side of me also loves punk and hardcore and crust music. So there's also like, the sociopolitical examinations of everything. But I think the cool thing is if you speak about the narrative of heavy metal in its totality to someone, especially someone who you would deem to be this completely reasonable human being with like a 9-to-5 job who probably makes twice as much as any of us do. You start realizing that what you're trying to sell to someone is a bunch of magic. Like the way you're kind of putting it to them is this really complicated lore of bands that, accomplished really crazy things when they were kids. Whether that be, I always go back to the story of all those dudes in Norway, right? You have these 18-year-olds who are writing these like, basically biblical in stature records for their art form, and they're killing each other over it. And they're not afraid to commit like really serious, heinous crimes. I'm not saying I approve of them, but it's just more like these are people who are really like, whether you believe that they were right or they were misguided or they were misled or however you contextualize it, these people did like really extreme shit for what is an art form, a form of entertainment, and maybe a form of self-gratification. Right. And I think, if I have to put pro wrestling on that same pedestal, when you're describing what that is to people, you're also describing this like magical thing where it's this like agreed upon contest with the ultimate aim. It's like this postmodern thing where like everyone is in on what's happening, but their expectations of it are trying to defy what the reality of it is. Right. And that's kind of weird. There's like this weird disconnect you have to switch on to make it worth it. Right. You have to believe that for a second, Hulk Hogan really was trying to fucking slam Andre the Giant. You know what I mean? And that's when it becomes effective. That's when it becomes bigger than just this stupid thing on Mondays. Right.
Well, if you go back and you watch WrestleMania 3, those were the glory days when kayfabe wasn't a thing. Mm-hmm. Everybody in the audience believed every single thing that was going on in that ring was 100% real. I mean, there were people weeping when Hulk actually managed to do the body slam.
And I think one thing that is like a really interesting commonality between both that and like heavy metal music is that the most effective people in those worlds are the people who are essentially presenting like a more souped up version of themselves, right? Like what I like about this band, for example, is that we're still ourselves. We're not trying to hide behind a bunch of swords and like pretending to be these like, I mean, we are assholes, but we're not pretending to be like these fucking assholes that are just like colder than thou or whatever. I'd like to think we're perfectly reasonable human beings. But when we perform and we write as this band and what we choose to present is just kind of like this real extension of who we are. It means something to us. And I think, fuck it. I mean, pro wrestling, it's just kind of the same thing, right? Those guys are a little nutty and they find that one thing about them that they can kind of hone in on. And then the effective ones, the good ones, blow that up times 10. And I think that's the commonality there. I think Brujeria is a great example of that.
So I have a view on it. I'll share it in a second. But Steve, I want to get your take on the pro wrestling extreme music connection.
I think Enrique nailed that. I don't have much more to like piggyback off of. But yeah, the bit about honing into like a certain part of your personality and just blowing it up to and it's like it's just like it. I'm kind of fumbling here. It's a tricky question, but I mean, wrestling is, as I always say, it's an art form, whether people want to agree or disagree. But it's yes, and the characters is about becoming something bigger than yourself. And I think like with music, with like a band, it's it's the sum of all parts. We're trying to create something bigger than ourselves and put each of our personalities in to get things out.
Ed, I think for you it maybe takes a different dimension because you're the front man of the band and on stage you're the focal point, and there is something to the. I in my view, the ability for the best front men to create a different kind of a connection with the audience. Like you are, if you go by the strictest possible interpretation of the word front man, like you are the focal point of the band.
Yeah, you're, I guess like the, on the front lines, so to speak. And then, as far as wrestling goes, I've always taken inspiration, even like from like, I think my very first bands as a wrestling fan, that it was kind of like, when you're starting out, and you get on stage and like, you're a bit nervous, but like, it's like kind of be a pro wrestler a little bit, and it like bridges the gap for you, and then just kind of, lose yourself a little bit, and then like, build off of it. I think I've been doing that since day one as a big wrestling fan, and just I kind of saw it, Yeah,
you cut promos.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
You cut promos. Cool.
And only wrestling fans will know what that phrase means, cutting promos. But here's the question for you. Let's start with you, Ed. Favorite wrestlers, like 2-3 wrestlers that you think are the elite of the elite. Any era, any promotion. Who are your favorites? For
me, the numero uno is Stone Cold Steve Austin. I got to go to WrestleMania 15 and see him win the belt against The Rock. My dad,
awesome.
My dad surprised me with tickets. I was 11. That's like probably the pinnacle of my childhood. And I remember that whole show. Butterbean knocking out Bart Gunn. The whole thing was wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, Stone Cold for sure. Sabu, I think, because it's kind of like a Brujeria in the way. It's just like it's so crazy, especially when they had him first coming out like as like the Hannibal Lecter, and it's like he's from this crazy place covered in scars. And it's funny too when you hear him talk, and he just kind of sounds like some asshole from New York, like yeah, you doing? And it's like that's how you talk. All right. And a number three, it might be The Rock. That was, big. I was definitely there for like the Attitude Era, and like they were like The Rock and the Stone Cold were, the two biggest names. Yeah, and I always wanted to hate The Rock, but you can't. He was awesome.
This is the thing, when he came back as the final boss.
Sure.
They were trying to paint him, and he was working really, really hard to get heat, but it's impossible because the thing is now the audiences are so smart. They recognize how excellent his work is. And when he's cutting the promo about Cody Rhodes' blood, and he's talking about Bubba Rhodes and all that stuff, it's genius. It is absolute genius. And he's one of those wrestlers that whether he's working as a babyface or as a heel, he really will make you believe everything that he says. I prefer him as a heel. I generally tend to prefer heel wrestlers, and I prefer heel promos. But I think his work across both is phenomenal. Enrique, your favorite wrestlers?
Oh man, I just want to say real quick, this is like a very dumbed down conversation on like Hegel and otherness. Like if you were talking to like some mystical French band, I'm sure they would be talking about it in that context and like Derrida and all that.
Why do you think I look so happy, man?
Yeah, I'm in my element. It's just funny. It's just funny because we're all and you read any other like interview with an Orthodox black metal band, and we're literally trying to say the same thing, but we're using crayons instead of oil paint. But I don't know if I had favorite pro wrestlers, man. Well, I mean, growing up, I was really in tune with lucha culture. So I'd have to say top 3. There'd be a tie between Rey Mysterio and Tiger Mask, just in terms of the masked ones. In hindsight, I would have had to put Kurt Angle up there. At the time, I didn't like him because he was a heel, so I didn't want to like him. But Kurt Angle was really up there. And in terms of the modern era, I love Kenny Omega, whether the Jim Cornette fans like him or not. I think he did a lot for the like revitalization of Japanese pro wrestling, and I really love Japanese pro wrestling. And I love the spotlight he gave it. And then, it's hard not to talk about like Stone Cold and The Rock. As a kid, I loved The Undertaker because of the lore and the magic and mysticism. I'm sure you see a thread here. But I think, to me, all of those are great. It's hard to really hone in on like a very small top three, just because all these guys were really great for different reasons, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, as you get older and you get smarter to the business, you start appreciating certain things about guys that you didn't appreciate when you were younger.
Yeah.
Triple H is a great example for me in that. Now I appreciate what a great worker he is. I didn't necessarily think that when I was younger.
And I used to argue before I read all the court documents that Vince McMahon was probably one of the best pro wrestlers in the world, right? In a way, like.
Dude, he was one of the greatest heels of all time.
It's just really hard to think about the court documents.
not think about the defecation. Steve, your top three?
I can tell you my number one very confidently. Shawn Michaels.
Oh shit.
Oh yeah.
Huge Shawn Michaels fan. Have been since I was a kid. As far as the others, I'm going to put Stone Cold up there. I wouldn't have said that as a kid, being a Shawn Michaels fan way back when, but put maybe Kurt Angle up there. No, it's tough, but hard number one is Shawn Michaels.
Shawn Michaels. My favorites are Stone Cold Steve Austin, but specifically, I was always a fan of his, but specifically Alliance heel Steve Austin.
No way.
The promos that he cut during that time are it's the funniest shit that I've ever seen anyone do in my entire life. And he actually had, in my view, I think a lot of people overlook just how good some of his matches were in that time. His match against Kurt Angle for the belt at I think it was No Mercy. Absolutely extraordinary. The triple threat match against Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho, which I think was at SummerSlam, phenomenal.
When you post this, can you bleep out when you say Chris Benoit?
Yeah.
It would just be very funny if you did that.
And so definitely him. Then I would say second, Ric Flair, circa 1986, like NWA Ric Flair. If I'm having a shit day, the first thing that I do is go on YouTube. I just type in Ric Flair classic promo 1986, and I just listen to the craziness that came out of his mouth. And then in terms of work, I think Bret the Hitman Hart has to be in there. He's one of the best ever. I loved him as a heel as well.
He's got to be in there as well. Yeah. Like it's tough for a three.
But let me say this: the wrestling equivalent of Brujeria. None other than New Jack. If you watch some of the New Jack promos from Smoky Mountain Wrestling, you know which one I'm referring to right now. The shout out to my man OJ, too less to worry about. It's the darkest shit I've ever heard in my entire life, but it is so fucking funny. And most of his promos are just hysterical to me. But he is a great example. But the summary I wanted to make based on the things you guys have said, I think whether it's black metal, whether it's professional wrestling, whether it's death metal, especially early death metal, whether it's gangster rap, all of these things represent rebellion, like unfettered rebellion, at least as we can imagine in our minds. And rebellion is empowerment. And I think that's partly why we're so drawn to it. You were talking about in the Nightside Eclipse, like I remember hearing that intro for the first time, and it's literally like there's black tar being pumped into your veins as you hear it, and then when that song starts into the Infinity of Thoughts, and there's that explosion, it's like, holy Jesus! Like I literally felt like I'd found a missing limb when I heard that record for the first time, and I'd been listening to extreme music for a long time, but that album made such an impression on me, and it's specifically those first two songs. The whole record's great. But that opening moment in that album it's on another level. But Ed, I wanted to ask you, when you said you started off in new metal, I kind of, with my mind was sort of working through it, and I mean, I don't have any major beef with new metal, but you sound like when you're singing, you sound like you're a salty dog. You know, you sound like you like the only shit you've ever listened to is demos by Absu and the most obscure stuff you could possibly find. Basically, you've peeked into J Dog's house and looked at all the demos he has on his record shelf, and that's the only music I listen to.
Yeah,
But then. So it kind of makes sense, because one of the kind of charms of the way you deliver your lyrics is you've got this fucking fantastic rhythm in the way that you do your vocals, which to me very often is missing from a lot of extreme metal vocalists. And I'm sitting here wondering, like, does that come, do you think, potentially from listening to new metal? Because I think people can say what they want about a lot of those bands, but the one thing that they had down and really nailed, the very best of them, was rhythm.
Sure. I never really thought about it that way. It's quite possible, because I do still listen to Korn sometimes. I saw them live a few months ago.
Oh well, so, now you're going to get kicked off this interview, but
yeah, bleep that out. It makes me think, actually, and I make a point to do this. That I think pronunciation is important. So, which, isn't, especially in black metal or death metal, not typically important a lot of times. And so that might just like give that vibe, that aura, instead of just like the, there's like,
I call them typewriter vocals, because whether it's death metal or whether it's black metal, it's like the pulse is basically I can't stand it. Absolutely can't stand it.
Sure. Pronunciation, I always found important. And then there are, certain like words or phrases that I think I gear towards that I know I can kind of like oomph. And, they're like kind of like in my back pocket, maybe like the way, guitarists like certain, arpeggios, they go back to this one or whatever. Like I go towards these words often, and it might give that idea. I'm not sure if it's from new metal. Maybe it is.
Well, you're also a master at deploying a strategic voice noise at exactly the right time. I think it's on Polluting the Sanctuary. There's like right before when the breakdown basically kicks in and you go, come on. I love shit like that. It's like the old Tom Warrior, like, oh,
I mean,
you do those at just the right spots.
Those are my, some of my favorite moments in heavy music. I think for me, it's hard to not overdo them, because I don't know, in my head, it's like this part could have it and this part could have it. And you're like, no, you choose 2 or 3 good ones and that's it.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're, I'm always looking for a part like that. It's just like, just to really set it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm Nocturno.
So Steve and Enrique, you guys played together in Crypt Sermon before Daeva was started, correct?
Yes. I'm trying to think in the timeline. So I started this band sort of as a side project around 2017 with another drummer, just as a project before he moved off to Michigan. And then but then Enrique hopped on board, and the rest of us shortly after.
And we needed we needed to play a fest as like the first ever show, and Steve needed to get a lineup together, and then that lineup, and like Ed, Ed was in with Steve too. I think there's a story about how Ed came along But yeah.
So just on a personal level, how did you guys meet? Because you clearly have, listening to the Through Sheer Will and Black Magic record, there's a natural synergy there, or there seems to be a natural chemistry that you guys have that doesn't come from people who just met in on a forum, or I'll date myself using the name, but the Recycler, a couple of weeks previously. Like you guys clearly have there's a connection there that translates to music that sounds. You guys kind of go that next tier from sounding really rehearsed to where the music sounds like a really natural expression of what happens when you guys get together as musicians.
So yeah, I mean, going back to what you were saying, Enrique and I have been playing together how long now?
I don't even know, man, because we met originally in college. I went to a college and Steve was friends with some people there, and we just met that way. Cut to us like throughout the years, just randomly staying in touch throughout like Facebook and things like that. And I moved here in 2007, so we met that year. I know we met in 2007 because I met you my freshman year of college.
And Ed, you and I have known each other since
long time.
You were
high school. I was in high school.
Yeah, you were 16, and I think I was 18 when I met you.
Yeah, Steve, my old band had flyers hanging up on South Street, which is like this main drag that used to have like heavy metal shops on it. And Steve answered a guitar ad for the band that we had at the time. That he was at the time, he rehearsed, he tried out, and that we thought he was too good to play with us at the time. It was like I was, I'm still just very much power chords when I play. And then he came to our practice space and just like was ripping through stuff and was like, "Oh, whoa, you're much better." But then we stayed friends. So instead of just being like, "Well, this probably won't work out," I think, you were just like, "Well, we can still like hang out. I just moved to the city." Like, yeah, I guess so. And then we kept hanging out and like drinking beers, getting your roommates to buy us beers, and listening to Pantera all night.
You guys are all based in Philadelphia now?
Yeah. I mean, this is my 18th year here. And I was going to say, like, it's funny because, like, Steve, like, I knew Ed around the same time too. I didn't know Ed that well, but we kept seeing each other at shows throughout those years.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated from college, like, I was like looking for work, just randomly messaging people saying, "What's up? How you doing?" And then I landed on just talking to Steve. And the story is that he asked me to go hang out with him while he was dog sitting for a guy who I would then learn was Brooks, the vocalist of Crypt Sermon. Mm-hmm. And while we were hanging out, we were just watching like a Manowar DVD together. And then we just kind of shot the shit and had some beers. And then like a week later, I think, or a few days later, I get a message from Steve going like, "Hey, I have this band that we're kind of working on with Brooks. Would you want to come and check it out?" And he said it was a doom band. So I was like, okay, well, I can definitely play this stuff. So I showed up and that ended up becoming Crypt Sermon. And then for this band, Daeva, like we had already put out 2 Crypt Sermon records together. And, so by then we already had a chemistry going. And then, he needed a live lineup to play Migration Fest for the $20 spin side of Migration Fest in Pittsburgh. So Frank joined, I joined, Ed had already been the vocalist on the EP. So I learned those songs. And then just out of the habit of practicing and playing together, we ended up kind of writing stuff. And that's kind of how Through Sheer Will came together. We just like, it just kind of evolved out of us being fill-ins, kind of transitioning into being full-time members all together at the same time.
So was that a record that was done the old school way? Bands in a rehearsal, musicians in a rehearsal room playing, coming up with ideas and sort of bouncing off of each other? Because and I'll pause there and I'll give you the context after I hear the answer. But was that a record formed from rehearsals and actually playing together in person?
I would say a lot of it was. Yeah, a lot of it was very organic. there would be times where I would come up with a lot of the stuff or like half a song at home. Sometimes I'd have most of a song written at home, but like the bulk and the meat of the record, a lot of it stemmed from like a riff or two and two ideas. And then we would just, hash it out in the rehearsal space. A lot of it Enrique and I playing together.
Just calling it on the spot, pro wrestling style. No, but really, it kind of did come from like just like figuring out where the natural conclusion of a riff goes that Steve brought, and then just seeing like how we can kind of dick around with like momentum and stops, and we should put this kind of riff here at the end of this. We'll figure out what that riff is later, but we know that it'll be this kind of riff, and this will be the rhythm for it, or the other way around. Like I have this riff, don't know what to do with it, and then how do we put that here? And it's kind of how Steve and I write a lot of stuff together.
I think the best example of something coming together very organically is Passion Under the Hammer. I had that intro riff, and then you started playing the drum beat, and then you kept going. So then I just came up with the variation, and then it just sort of wrote itself that day. And then at the end, you started doing the tom hits. So then I improvised that last riff, and it was pretty much done in like a night. Which that doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes it takes us a good while to finally complete the song. We'll go back and rework things a lot. But that was lightning in a bottle, that song.
Yeah, and with vocals, we kind of let Ed just, Ed just does his own thing, and we put full trust in this man to deliver, because he always does. I think, Steve, wasn't he not supposed to be the original vocalist on the EP?
No, it was me. I'm fucking awful. So
there you go.
I remember Steve called me and like asked if I'd be interested, but said it was like, I'm gonna do the vocals, but I just want to see how, like, maybe you would if I don't like my vocals. And I'm like, sure. And then it was like 2 days later, he called me. He's like, I hate my vocals. Like, why don't you come in and try it out? And pretty much the rest is history.
What that was Justin being like, can you want to just try? I'm like, yeah, I'll try. And I like blew my voice out immediately. It was just a chore. I sounded horrible. I was like, this isn't working. And so I would have just tried to sound like Ed. So I was like, why don't I just call Ed to do the job? So
yeah, I wasn't in any bands at the time. So, it was kind of like, yes, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny. The reason I asked about writing the music in a rehearsal space in that old fashioned environment, I don't know if it's because there's so few bands that do it nowadays, but you can hear that organic element to the music, but it's actually something you can pinpoint even more precisely than that. There's a flow to records that are written that way that you do not get from and there's a lot of great albums written by dudes sitting alone in their rooms. Some of my favorite albums of the last couple of years were solo endeavors where musicians are brought in and told, you have to play that exactly how I say you have to play it. That's great. So I'm not saying anything against it, but there is a flow and there's a momentum to albums that are written together like that is absolutely magical, in my opinion, when you get it right. And this album to me absolutely has that feel. It has an old school feel. Like I've passed this on to a bunch of people. My friend Swartolv, who was the bassist for Gehenna, very much shares my view on what music should sound. Well, actually, I shouldn't say was, he is. Eogon from Eccles, and everybody that hears it says the same thing. It's like these guys really capture the feel of like the late 80s, like mid to late 80s. That like bullet belts and spiked wristbands, real hateful feel. But I think a big part of that is actually being in the rehearsal space together.
I actually agree, just because so much, the whole key and heart behind this music and doing it well is momentum. So it's just how the drums and the guitars and everything are driving together. So when you're in the rehearsal space and you can you can just feel what part's right and what part's not, and is are we losing steam? Are we getting bored? Like, is this sagging here? I'm writing currently some riffs for the new stuff finally, but I'm spending less time trying to come up with like half structures of songs and more just coming up with like clusters of ideas, because I know in the end it's going to turn out better when we work on it in the practice space. And we're all working together.
How old is that cat that you got there, by the way? The cat's very docile, I got to say. My cats. So we have. So where we live here, we have 10 cats because we inherited a stray who was pregnant and had 6 kittens. And after we gave away one of them, my wife said, I can't deal with giving away the others. So those 5 got kept. And then, various other cats that we've got here. But there's only one that would come as close to me as what you've got yours over there. And she would literally, I would have to perch my arm like this. And then she just lays on my arm like it's a sofa. But it's, Anyway, not to go off course, but I really do think in the modern age it is a shame that not more bands are writing in the rehearsal space, are writing the way the old guard writes. The first guy that kind of really articulated that to me was David Gray from Acrococker, and he was saying, like the Acrococker records that he loved and the songs that he loved that they had done most were Goat of Mendes, Corazon, stuff where they were in a rehearsal space, 3-4 nights a week, and they were writing those songs together, and those songs were forming together. And what you just said there, Steve, is something I never quite thought of before, but it ties back to the importance of having somebody in a room who's going to tell you that your shit stinks. If you need somebody there that kind of can give you at least some degree of indication, like, yeah, I'm really into this, and I kind of feel that energy is building up, or someone that goes, to your point, this is starting to, this part of the song is outliving its welcome now.
Yeah, and sometimes things sound like they're going to work in your head, and then when you try to do it at the practice space, it just falls short. So, yeah, no, it is a very, we don't really write this way in Crypt Sermon totally. It's a little bit more 50-50, but for this particular band, I think it just makes the world of difference to just get in the rehearsal space.
You guys write a lot of, like, in a lot of your songs on the record, there's a lot of breaks and things where, like, in my mind, I'm hearing that as though it was very specifically written for the live situation. Yeah. Which again is a good thing. Some of the best live bands, Biohazard, Deicide, they very openly admit, like, when we're writing this song, we're thinking specifically, like, how are people going to react when this break kicks in, or when this sequence of the song kicks in. You kind of just verified it there, but yeah, as you say, the question that I was going to ask you is, do you guys intentionally do that?
I would say so, yes, because like for this, I'm always thinking about how I would react to it in a live situation. Yeah.
I think I always just kind of like assume that it's going to be performed at some point. So shy away from things that aren't physically possible. Don't put yourself in that position, too much.
And you also need to have spots that like bring you back in if you're starting to lose, like, steam with something. Like, there's no better feeling, I think, than when a band's in a room and you come up with this like stupid fucking part that's just awesome. And you play it and everybody, can hear the spot when it comes in, and then everyone goes, oh shit, and you start laughing because you hit something that kind of resonates with your Cro-Magnon, idiot brain, and if that part of you thinks that the riff you're hearing is great, then you landed on something. And I'd like to think that this record was an attempt at doing that 100% of the time.
100% is just enough.
Yeah, and I think anything that felt short of that was nixed immediately. And I think That really is how I think that record kind of came together, because in a lot of ways this won't be our only record, but like the intention of this one, among other things, was to, at least in my mind's eye, like to be this like love letter to the genre that we love, and really honing in on the very specific things about the genre that are just so cool and appealing and just unrelenting in a way,
But also,
so you're going to say?
I was just saying, but also just putting everything on 10.
Yeah.
Sharpening all the edges. Yeah, you go ahead.
What I really love about it, though, is that it is a very overt love letter to clearly the stuff that influenced you, but you guys all bring your own unique personality to it. Which there's a lot of bands that can do, reverent records or reverent songs, but there's not a lot of bands that can do it in such a way where you can tell what they probably listen to in their personal life, but it sounds uniquely them. And one of the things I think that sets it apart, Enrique, is your drum style. There's these sequences, Polluting the Sanctuary, again, great example, especially towards the end of the song. You're doing stuff that's just kind of off-piste. It's just not quite what you would expect most modern extreme drummers to be doing. So how did your drum style evolve? Like how did you start to play the drums?
So I think I started playing drums through just like private tutelage when I was a little kid. Like I said, I was practicing rudiments on a snare drum, right? But then around 6th grade in school, you were given the choice to pick electives, and I picked music because I really wanted to play drums. I was not allowed to play drums. So that backfired pretty hard. And instead I ended up taking private lessons through the National Conservatory of Music in Bolivia. So I had like, one of the top like Latin jazz drummers from back home give me private lessons, and I retained none of it. I can't play jazz to save my life. I have this huge appreciation for it, and I love it. And I learned how to play a lot of folk instruments too. I've never wanted to interweave those with the music I create, because I just think they have a place and time, and that this is not the place and time for them. But so that's how I just started kind of like dancing around a drum set, right? And then I think as a kid, when I was young, you have the usual suspects of rock drummers and rock bands that you learn the drums through. So like, you're a kid playing AC/DC, you're a kid playing Kiss songs, you're a kid playing Nirvana if you're feeling really adventurous, right? But it wasn't until I discovered like Maiden and the concept of a double bass pedal by listening to Rain and Blood, right? That's how I got in tune with that. And I think the weirdness for me is that I've been like a lifelong idolizer of Igor Cavalera, but when I was a kid, I found super extreme drums from people like Derek Roddy to be so incredible and entertaining that that's kind of what I immediately veered to. And I think, unfortunately, I hate to admit it, but like, I think it actually handicapped my playing a lot. I think I was a kid trying to do too much and ignoring the basics. But I think maybe that's what informs a lot of my drumming. I try to be the Igor of any band at the speeds of people who are far more extreme than that. And I think one of the things about modern metal drummers is that they do as much as they can at all times, right? They're very flashy with playing very technical and stuff. And I think there's always room for that. But for the kind of player I am, I like to go with feeling. I like to go with momentum. So I'm less inclined to worry about the techie stuff, and I'm just more inclined to serve a song. And I think for this kind of band, that's really important, because whether it's drums or guitar, especially guitar, I think bands like these can often fall into this trap of just being like riff salad fests or just like double bass explosions, but there's no real like song behind it. So at any time, what I'm trying to do is figure out how to like serve the vocals in a verse, or how can I play something that's going to help shine what Steve is playing, and like a very simple syncopation or a little cymbal clutch here is going to help that. You know what I mean? So I think that's the best way I can put it. And then with Passion Under the Hammer specifically, that song was like my little weird tribute to Gene Hoglan. I love some of the moments in like the Dark Angel records where you can hear him like do like this pretty simple like mid-pace double bass stuff, but then what he's doing on like his hands with like different bells and all that stuff because of his weird cymbal setups and the fact that he would play open-handed, it sounded very complicated, but what he was doing really wasn't. But if you try to play it as a right-handed player, it was really hard to pull off. And that's where the inspiration for like a lot of the drum ideas on that song specifically came from. And then, how fast can I blast on a song, stuff like that. Like that's just how some of this stuff kind of evolves over time.
But you have a very expressive way of playing the drums, and expressive combined with knowing, to your point now of you're playing in a way where you want to accent what either Ed is doing or what Steve is doing. And I think that's one of the things that really stood out for me. I mean, I generally don't like technical death metal very much, like, this hyper tech death metal like Archspire and shit like that. It's just not, it does absolutely nothing for me. Like I want to feel like the drummer, the guitarist, everyone that's there is doing it because they're releasing emotion. They're not showing off how big of a virtuoso they are on their instrument. I can appreciate the technical mastery behind it, but it doesn't stir me. I don't get that, feeling of my insides being yanked around the way that I do when I hear Battles in the North or Legion or something like that.
Yeah, and I think like, the use of toms and cymbals specifically, like for me, it's a lot of old black metal records like those, or even like something more accessible like Maiden. Like when you listen to a lot of Nico, a lot of his tom work is used to really accentuate guitar melodies, or to put exclamation points on very specific vocal parts. And granted, this is way more violent sounding than that, but for me, the theory of how I like to play, that's what that is. That's how I tend to do it.
Well, bringing it full circle, you were talking about in the Nightside Eclipse, Faust on that record is a complete and utter savage. I mean, it's just an assault of the drum kit. It's some of the hardest hitting that I've ever heard, and it was, again, he stood out from all of the other black metal drummers because he sounded so different, and he had such a different way of playing. Like, he's not showy, but everything is done with intent and with purpose.
Yep, and I think my favorite kinds of drums on records, just in general, and I think for me, with this context in mind, like I think Iron Maiden's an exception to the rule, but a lot of more extreme stuff, I like drums that, not in terms of mix, but just in terms of the playing philosophy, I like drums that kind of wash over you as the record goes, because then you have replay value. You can go back and really start dissecting stuff. So I think a really interesting band to listen to with that in mind is like Morbid Angel. Right? Because and it's weird because it's almost antithetical to what we were saying earlier. So much of Morbid Angel is written on a computer, right? And then you have the drummers who have to go in and kind of learn how to do it and like write these really obscure, weird, counterintuitive drum parts. But it's just so much all the time that you go back and listen to the details, and it's really interesting. And I think maybe part of that is also my upbringing with Derek Roddy. Like I would listen to King of All Kings and I Monarch on repeat, just trying to figure out how he would do these weird 2/3 patterns and how he would do these weird like tom double bass and cymbal work with a snare drum on like 3 and 6 and whatever. But it was never overplaying. Like he always did that shit to serve like the songs on those records, because the riffs were never crazy either. They were just very like meat-headed, very dumb in an awesome way,
I remember when my friend of mine brought when I was still living in South Africa, he went overseas and he came back and he brought me Conquering the Throne. That opening riff to Spiritual Holocaust, just the way the drums are like da 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 da, and like so when it starts blasting, it's so fucking powerful. Steve, you mentioned you writing riffs for a new record.
Yeah, it's been kind of an off and on thing. But yeah, we have, I have some, I think Enrique and I have like just right now, just 2 rough ideas, but I have tons of riffs that I've just been working on. When time allows, there's been a lot of stuff going on my end personally and just throughout life that kind of threw a wrench in things, but we plan on getting back to work here within the next couple weeks on working on a new record.
But the last Crypt Sermon record, if memory serves me correctly, that also did really well for you guys. I mean, that was on the was that the it was definitely on the best of list of Decibel's best of list. I remember that, and it was on quite a few others. So like that's a record. I'm sure that the aftermath has kept you pretty busy.
Yeah. I mean that, and a lot of we also took a lot of time after we finished through Sheer Will to write that record. So, but yeah, that's definitely kept us busy. But looking forward to get back on the horse here soon.
I'm about to say, and so the timeline I'm going to guess from what you're saying is probably 2026.
I'm hoping to be sooner. Well,
all right. Well, guys, I really appreciated the conversation. Appreciate your time. It's as I said, bizarrely, you guys have been a band I've built up so much in my mind to wanting to get on the show that you have this. I always have this trepidation of two things. If I haven't spoken to somebody before, I think A, what the fuck am I going to say to these people? And B, and generally it always works out, but I also dread the day that I meet somebody whose music I really like and I go, my God, this person's an asshole.
Sure. Yeah.
We had plenty to talk about. You guys definitely aren't assholes. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And we will speak hopefully again at some point down the road.
Hell yeah. I think we'll have plenty of reasons to revisit a conversation. And if you ever do an episode where we just talk about, the newest WrestleMania, I'm sure we'll all get some beers.
We can definitely do that. We can most definitely do that.
Sign of Cadaver.
Daeva with Passion Under the Hammer, taken from their debut album Through Sheer Will and Black Magic, out now on $20 spin, and then very eloquently fading into Nocturnal Graves with Satan's Cross off of their, I believe that actually was their debut album, and it was certainly the album of the same name, came out back in 2007. A double banger coming your way to cap off an immensely enjoyable conversation. I want to say massive thank you to Steve, Ed, and Enrique for their time. I certainly think that they'll be back on the podcast again. We have plenty more to talk about, and I really did mean it when I said at the end of that conversation, you know, when there's a band that you're really into and you get the guys on the show for the first time, or you get somebody from the band on the show for the first time, I always have that little bit of anxiety that the person in question is going to be a complete and utter dickhead and ruin my love of their music. That definitely was not the case on this occasion, and as such, it should be a trigger for you to head over to their Bandcamp, certainly head over to their social media, and just give these guys all the love and support that they deserve. Daeva, phenomenal band. Like I said, I have been raving about these guys for 3 years, and with good reason. They are, in my view, the best blackened thrash band to hit metal's pike in probably 20 years, maybe even a little bit more. Right now, my friends, if you're the kind of soy boy who cries your eyes out every time the MCU announces yet another dreadful, high-budget load of shit movie, then it's time for you to hit the bricks, because this is my weekly news rant.
Round them up for judgment. And hang them where the world can see.
All right, friends, I've got me a freshly brewed cup of coffee. It is Monday afternoon at the tail end of a glorious bank holiday. And yesterday, I went to go and watch a movie called Warfare, directed by Alex Garland at the cinema. I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you guys about this, because I'll be good goddamned if this is not going to be the best movie of 2025. Certainly judging by the fucking shite they had in the trailers when I was at the cinema, there is nothing coming up that could potentially challenge this for supremacy. But I mean, regardless, even in a good year, this would have been right up there. Alex Garland, for anybody keeping score, has been quite the prolific director over the course of the last couple of years. He directed back in 2012 Dread, which I think is criminally underrated. And just as a side note, I still get somewhat naively excited about any mention of a Dread sequel, which that I definitely don't think is going to happen. But there was a rumor for a period of time that they would do Dread Mega City 1. Those rumors actually picked up steam again recently. Apparently there's talks, and again, this might be complete hearsay, but apparently there's talks of Carl Urban working on that with Amazon once The Boys is done. But anyway, getting back to Alex Garland, he also did Ex Machina in 2014, great movie. 2022, he did Men, which I really enjoyed. 2024, he did my favorite movie of last year, Civil War. And now he returns with Warfare. Warfare isn't so much a movie as it is an experience. It isn't, particularly heavy on plot. It's not heavily character-driven. It is basically it's a fly on the wall experience where you see a platoon of soldiers thrust into an incredibly difficult, quite horrific situation, and it's looking at how they try and get themselves extracted from that scenario. That's probably the best way to describe it. But in terms of how this was made and how it sucks you in to that experience, I've honestly never experienced anything quite so intense inside of a movie theater in my entire life. And that I genuinely say that without exaggeration, without sort of any hyperbole. It is a mind-blowing experience. There were people inside the theater that were very audibly crying at the end of the movie, and it's not because the movie is especially tragic or especially emotional. I think it's just because you feel so completely spent by the end of it. You're almost relieved that it's over. Great actors throughout the cast. It includes Michael Gandolfini, son of the late, great James Gandolfini. The direction, as I've hinted, fantastic. The sound editing on this absolutely demands to be experienced inside of a theater. So unless you've got something completely brutal at home, then I would suggest try and get to a movie theater that's got a decent surround sound setup. Try and see this on IMAX. The way that they make silence and just overpowering noise mean so much in this movie is, again, unlike anything that I've ever seen. So it might not be for everybody. I think if you're expecting something like Black Hawk Down or Saving Private Ryan, it's probably not going to be for you. It's not a movie that takes a particularly firm stance on anything, kind of like Civil War. But as I said, my favorite movie of 2025, and I am 80% confident nothing else is going to come out this year that's going to be better than that. The only movie I'm actually looking forward to is actually something else that Alex Garland has been involved in, and that's 28 Years Later. But as for the rest, I saw the trailer for Thunderbolts. I mean, that literally looked like I'd sooner take a thunderbolt to the testicles and fucking suffer through that shit. I saw the trailer to the new Mission Impossible. I mean, that looks excruciating. What else did they show? I can't even remember. That's how nondescript most of the crap is that's coming out nowadays. But Warfare is a rare exception. Okay, now let's move on to metalstorm.net, and the first band that is grabbing my attention, Death Commander. They have delivered a new track. It says here, British death metal representatives Death Commander are streaming a brand new single entitled Yellow Cross. It says here, old school death metal in the spirit of Bolt Thrower, paired with haunting lyrics about the horrors of World War I. Loads of bands have done that, but can't exactly be sitting here saying we don't need another World War I band when, we listen to 30 bands in succession that sing almost exclusively about the Horned Lord. But it says here the track is taken from the upcoming album Never to Grow Old. That album drops on the 30th of May 2025 via FDA Records. Let's get into it. I think calling this old school death metal in the spirit of Bolt Thrower is probably putting it quite mildly. I mean, this is about as close to a just straight up ripoff of Bolt Thrower as I've ever heard. There's a thin line, I think, between paying tribute to a band or taking influence from a band that inspired you and just kind of outright cloning them. And that, I mean, even just down to the main riff in that song, I'm pretty confident if you gave me 20 minutes, I could probably dig around and find a riff on a Bolt Thrower record that is note for note what you just heard. Even so, though, I could take this had it offered me something in the execution, but the problem for me here is really the only thing that I like about this song is the vocals of Cruxator, or Cruxator, or whatever the fuck he calls himself. I think that's pretty cool, especially when he does the sort of mid-pitched screaming. I would assume that's him rather than backing vocals. But, you know, if you're going to go for the bolt thrower type sound, you need the guts. You need that pounding, driving rhythm section that, you know, in my view, was really one of the things that made bolt thrower as special as they were. And this just doesn't have it whatsoever. It sounds actually, in the absence of that rhythm section, it sounds pretty plodding and quite lethargic. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. By way of contrast, let me throw a bolt thrower track on just to show what these guys are aiming for and why, in my opinion, they've really missed the mark. This is a track that I've dug up off of Those Once Loyal, and the song, in case you haven't heard it yet, is Anti-Tank. I'll give you guys a quick minute to bask in its glory, and then we'll move on. Now that is fucking hard as nails, and you can't beat that rhythm section of Joe Bench on the bass, Martin Kearns on the drums. Can't beat it. Clearly, if you're a Death Commander, can't imitate it either. So, thumbs down from me. It's a long way of saying thumbs down from me. Bolt Thrower fucking rules. Even though, J-Dog refers to them as Woke Thrower, which I have to confess I do find very, very funny. But, I will never not be a fan of that band. One of the most influential bands on me in terms of death metal, without a shadow of a doubt. Moving on, we've got a new track by a band called Skaphos. It says here, French black death metal band Skaphos have dropped Hypoxia. This is the newest preview track of their oncoming full-length effort, Cult of Azura, coming out on Transcending Obscurity Records, which it feels to me like nowadays not a week goes by where they're not releasing at least 3 or 4 different records. Be that as it may, I like me some French black metal. Like me some French death metal too, so let's hear what they sound like. I like this very much. This is it's kind of a coming together of Morbid Angel, Domination, Covenant era Morbid Angel. I'd say that the guitar even has that kind of dry Covenant production, like that sound that the guitar had on Covenant. But yeah, so this is, it's a coming together of Morbid Angel, Deathspell Omega, and Mayhem. Initially, when the song started and the first riff was going, I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, is this now going to be, we've just heard Death Commando ripping off Bolt Thrower, is this basically going to be somebody ripping off Trey Azathoth and calling it, blackened death metal? Fortunately, though, they mix things up, and I mean, again, they've got a lot going for them here. Nathan Forer, their drummer, tremendously talented. I love the way he drums. He goes kind of off beat, but can turn on the voltage, turn on the juice when he needs to. Just looking him up on Metal Archives, he's in quite a few different bands, or at least has been in quite a few different bands. Born Criminal, Warside, Aggressor, Purgatory Unleashed. He's also the live drummer for a band called Paths to Deliverance. They have a very, very strong vocals. As a matter of fact, again, based on what I'm seeing on Metal Archives, they got one main vocalist and then two backing vocalists. Those backing vocals, I think, add a huge amount to the vocal style, because that really sort of deep, almost Ross Dolan style vocal that Stefan Petion is doing, it works, but you do need something that I think counterbalances it for it to be really effective, and they nail that. So, yeah, overall, I mean, we've only listened to 1 minute 48 seconds, but that is very, very promising. Not a band that I was familiar with. Checking Metal Archives now, they put out their 2 previous albums independently. The first one was called Bat Escape, that came out in 2020. Tuoi, that came out in 2022. And this one, of course, brand new on Transcending Obscurity Records. Helpfully, they don't tell us on Metal Storm when this album is coming out, but I can reveal the release date is going to be the 9th of May, so it's just around the corner. So definitely want to add to the list if, at least as far as I'm concerned. Now, speaking of lists, my friends, Flight of Icarus hosts a very enjoyable YouTube channel called Metal Trenches, for those of you guys that don't know. The bloke's, he's what should I call it? Stage name. His pen name is Flight of Icarus. Anyway, long story short, good YouTube channel, very well presented, generally very well researched. And if you're looking to, spend 10 minutes of time idly, then it's a nice way to pass a couple of minutes. So anyway, he's just put out a list of his favorite 20 black metal albums of the decade so far. And as much as this bloke might know about death metal and music generally, there are some incredibly questionable inclusions here, including Imperial Triumphant, Spirit of Ecstasy. No matter where you stand on Imperial Triumphant, as far as I'm concerned, they most definitely aren't black metal. Borknagar, Fall, another band, might be decent if you like progressive music, but it's definitely not black metal. Ishon, his self-titled album. Ishon hasn't made black metal since the Third Emperor record. Prometheus definitely doesn't count as black metal in my view. White Ward, False Light, nothing that contains saxophone should be regarded as black metal in my view. And the list goes on. A couple of okay inclusions, but for the most part, it's basically just a collection of mid or fake black metal. And so I have decided that I will correct his list, and I will provide to you, the Legion, a list of what is, in my opinion, the 20 best black metal albums so far of this year. And I've to add further complexity to the challenge, I've made it so that I can only choose one album per band, because over the course of the last, if we take 2020 through to 2024, that release period, obviously there's been bands that have put out multiple albums in that time. But in no particular order, simply as it comes to mind, the first one I would say, Ecclese, Melano. Obviously torn there between Melano and House of the Black Geminis, but I will go with Melano. The Antichrist Imperium, Volume 3, masterpiece. might not necessarily count as traditional black metal, but it's more black metal than it is death metal, so I bucket it as such. The latest Horner record, the title of which I won't bother attempting to pronounce, Mr. Ming, Med Homri, absolute masterpiece. They seem to have gone awfully quiet. I know that they're playing at Steelfest, but I haven't really seen or heard much of them beyond that, so hopefully they're busy working on something new. Panzerfaust, The Sons of Perdition, my favorite of the quadrilogy, Chapter 2, Render Unto Eden. Utkena, Nex Fornix, fantastic record. Selbst, Relatos de Angustia. Inferno, Paradigma. Funeral Mist, Deiform. Inquisition, Veneration of Medieval Mysticism and Cosmological Violence. Ruim, Black Royal Spiritism. The fact that that's not on the list, I mean, that immediately disqualifies your list. If you didn't include Ruim or Cleese, your list is moot as far as I'm concerned. Trivax, Eloa Burns Out. Slidir, Whiteheart. Darvaza, Ascending into Perdition. Aversio Humanitatis, Behold the Silent Dwellers. Cloak, Black Flame Eternal. Bythos, Chthonic Gates Unveiled, Night Shall Drape Us, Lunatic Choir, Marduk, Memento Mori, and Tombs Under Sullen Skies. So there, my friends, is a fucking proper black metal list, and I'll post that list in the description to the podcast. So if you want to go back and check out those records, do so. And obviously, if you buy anything, tell the bands who it was who sent you. Open for debate, of course. If there's some stuff that you'd include or something that you think I've missed off, let me know. There's a whole bunch that could have gone on there. The last year's True Black Dawn album, absolutely extraordinary. You could have stuck again. This is probably contentious even calling them black metal, but I would say either one of the last two Oranzi Pazuzu records. Altari, absolutely fucking phenomenal. But Imperial Triumphant, most definitely not. And Ishon, I mean, between the two, I don't know what's worse, Ishon or Imperial Triumphant. But anyway, moving on. Escarnium have revealed their new single. It's called Cancerous Abyss. 3 weeks prior to the release of their new full-length effort, Inexorable Entropy, Death Metal Force, Escarnium put out another new track in preview called Cancerous Abyss. I think we did listen to a song off this record, but since I've already clicked on the link, we're committed to it. So let's give this one a whirl. Once again, the Morbid Angel and Hate Eternal influences run very deep, yeah, but that shouldn't put you off from listening to it, because it is actually pretty goddamn good. Better than the first single, if memory serves me correctly. Great vocals by Victor Elian, intense blasting drumming by Nestor Carrera, good riffing, good overall vibe to the song. I like it. Thumbs up. Will it make my top 30 of 2025? More likely than not, it won't. But I definitely do enjoy it. Midnight have confirmed dates for the Steel, Rust, and Disgust European tour. Seems like that might be worth potentially checking out. Although, again, I say I'm going to check things out, and the reality of it, friends, is it's a fucking far way to travel into London for a band, especially if I have to stay over. And so it has to take something pretty special for that to happen. Like, I have to be interviewing the band for Chronicles of Chaos. Fucking, what's going on with me today? For Into the Necrosphere. And I have to, there needs to be more than just me going to see the band. I mean, maybe I'd make the exception for Rammstein, but, between the 150 to 200 pounds for a hotel and fucking the cost of travel inside London, the cost of eating and all that sort of shit, it has to be worth my while to go. Udod or however you pronounce this, premiere a 2-track single. Thomas Eriksson's Udod is back with a brand new 2-track single. Both Bakken for Uskogen's Utkant and Positive Tanker are available for listening via the YouTube links below. Now, Udod is the work of Thomas Eriksson, otherwise known as Mork, and I'm going to just double check this to make sure. Bear with me 10 seconds, friends, while I consult Metal Archives. And obviously, I do like Mork very much, so let's kind of throw that in there just as a baseline. I cannot recall actually properly listening to the Udod full length that was put out on Peaceful Records last year. Apparently, there was one put out last year in March. I don't recall really spending a huge amount of time listening to it. So this is gonna be about, I guess, reacquainting myself with the project as much as anything else, and we're gonna go with listening to Positive Tanker, since that's the title that I can most easily pronounce without making a fool of myself. Let's hit it. All right, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not particularly overly optimistic about how the rest of this is going to sound, but it feels to me like this introduction is dragging on way longer than it needs to. So I'm going to jump to the midpoint of the song, 3 minutes and 10 seconds, and hopefully something is going on that's better than that fucking crap that we just listened to. Holy fucking shit, that is some of the worst, most deplorable dog poo I have heard on this news rant since I've started doing this podcast. Again, as I said, I'm fucking speechless. I can't believe that somebody with the talent of Thomas Eriksson can put this fucking... I don't know what to call it. I mean, this is... It sounds like the dude is taking the piss. It literally sounds like this guy is fucking trolling people, because Mork is a great band. I mean, Riff City on most of their albums. As a matter of fact, I would go as far as to say I don't think there is a Mork album that I think is poor. There might be ones that I like more than the other, but there's not a single one where I would listen to it and go, this is fucking rubbish. This, my friends, is beyond rubbish. I mean, it sounds like something that he might have recorded at the age of 10 when he was still figuring out how to use a guitar, and maybe he was fucking around with a little 8-track in his bedroom. That's the sort of thing that I would expect, a moderately gifted musician no older than 10 to come up with. But this is fucking dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. And the only reason that any label would put that out is because he's connected to it. Which in many ways to me is the shame of it, because honestly, I don't think that I mean, who would, like, back in the day when we still used to go into CD stores and you listen to the album and then you decide whether you're going to buy it, who the fuck would listen to that at one of those listening booths and go, yeah, brilliant, I can't wait to really dig into this? Fucking more than a thumbs down. I mean, if I took over the world as global ruler of everything, I'd probably have to consider giving or sentencing Thomas to 20 lashes for coming up with that rubbish. All right, Dormant Ordeal, full album stream available. I have profiled Dormant Ordeal twice on the news rant. A lot of you reaching out to me over the weekend saying that you guys really like the record, so good. And who knows, maybe I'll reach out to them and see if they want to come on the podcast. Speaking of guests, both former and future of the show, news broke this weekend that Nick Wallwork of Winterfylleth has left the band. I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but it just says, after giving his all for 16 years, 7 albums, 2 live albums, various EPs, as well as countless live performances, bassist Nick Wallwork has taken the decision to hang up his guitar and retire from English neo-folk black metal band Winterfylleth. Just a comment from me. I've gotten to know the Winterfylleth guys, most of them anyway, over the course of the last 18 months, and I've come to grow quite fond of them, including Nick. Really nice guys. I am delighted to see them achieve the level of success and recognition that they are achieving. And, I know that if Nick has taken the decision to leave now, it's probably for good reason. It might be, and I don't know, so just speculating, but, maybe the guy, has gotten to a point in his life where his career takes priority. Maybe he wants to start a family. I don't know. But either way, wish him the very best of luck, and I know they'll replace him with somebody, who's of equal capability and who fits in with the band really well too. But good luck to him on his future endeavors, and I just thought I'd mention that because they genuinely are in a scene where so many people can be extraordinarily pretentious and just not the kind of folks that you want to spend any time with. They are definitely exceptions. Vader have got some new music out. It says, you can now watch the official music video for Vader's newest track, Unbending, which also serves as the official anthem for this year's Mystic Festival in Poland. The song is taken from the band's upcoming EP, Humanility, set for release on May the 30th through Nuclear Blast. Guitarist Marek Spider Pajak describes the track as a relentless character moving forward, maintained in a classic convention, tough and raw, yet intriguing. So in the comments here on Metal Storm, Danielle Elite calls the track quite underwhelming and boring, despite being so short. We also said, or another person, Lay Kiwi, also says, well, if they were going for accessible, they hit the mark. It only sounds like Vader and not literally any band because of the vocals. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're right. I actually I find it quite endearing. In truth, Vader's appeal to me has been very, very limited beyond Black to the Blind. I think De Profundis, The Ultimate Incantation, and Black to the Blind are 3 phenomenal albums. But I think the worst thing really that could ever have happened to this band is the success that they had with Litany that they put out back in 2000. There was a track on there called Zephyr, and for whatever reason, Zephyr landed really, really positively with the death metal crowd of the day. When they played live, people still go absolutely ballistic. I witnessed it firsthand. Probably one of the craziest pits I've ever seen in my entire life, including Biohazard and Slayer, seeing them play that song at the Underworld in Camden. But it feels to me like they've just kept on trying to go back to that well, creatively speaking, since Litany was released. And they've never really put out an album that that's intrigued me in any great, or to any great degree since those releases that I just mentioned. So I think it's very cool that Mystic Festival has their own theme song. That's for sure. But as far as the song is concerned, is it going to greatly increase my excitement at the idea of a brand new Vader EP or new Vader music coming up? No. Okay, let's check out some more music. As a matter of fact, before I go any further, I'm not going to do any questions really this week, but I did have 1 or 2 more lingering from last time round, including one from K.R. McCoy of Obsidian Shrine. Great band, by the way, that you definitely need to check out. And I will have KR on here, either doing a news rant with me, or maybe we'll do a chat at some point. I just need to, just need to get the schedules to align. But anyway, he commented on the Paul Ledney interview and said there's a lot to be said about the use of technology in metal. Paul mentioned laptops being common. That being said, what are your thoughts about it? Bands like Mortician, Limbonic Art, Mysticum, Putrid Pile, and even Obsidian Shrine wouldn't exist without the use of technology. Thought it would be a worthwhile topic of discussion for the podcast, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I don't mind bands using laptops for samples, but I don't like laptops for drums. I don't like a drum machine on stage. As a matter of fact, I would actually say if you're going to perform live as a metal band and you don't have a live drummer, then you can't perform live. That's just a personal preference. I was in a band that performed live with a drum machine. I think you just lose too much as far as there's something about the impact of a live drummer, the feel of the bass drum, the violence that drumming brings to the live situation, that if you don't have it, it doesn't feel right. I think you can get away with doing an awful lot of things on stage without a drummer. I know Vitriol played live with, if I'm not mistaken, it was basically just Kyle on guitars and vocals and the drummer. I can see that working, even though again for me it's not the full band, so I would prefer to not have to see that. But in the absence of other options, you could do that. You could get away with not having a bassist play live with you. But in my opinion, you can't get away without a drummer. You have to have that. Without it, it just doesn't work. So, curious to hear everybody else's thoughts, though. Tell me if you could point me to an example of where I'm wrong, is what I would say there. And I'm not saying that I'm definitively correct here, but I would love to see examples of where I'm wrong. I have never seen a band play live without a drummer that I've enjoyed. Lord Belial is back 3 years after the release of their album Rapture. Swedish black metal masters Lord Belial are now ready to return with a successor entitled Unholy Trinity. It will be set free on June the 27th, 2025 through Hammerheart Records, recorded by the legendary Andy LaRocque in the Sonic Train studios in Varberg, Sweden. To taste a first piece of new music, give a spin to the Ipse Venet track. That is fucking fantastic. Lord Belial is a band that have been going for a long, long time, and going back to Kiss the Goat back in 1995 and Enter the Moonlight Gate in 1997, they always fit in for me in that space between Dissection and Dark Funeral. They kind of had the melody of Dissection and probably the more traditional metal sensibilities of Dissection, but they also had the blasting and some of the black metal craziness of Dark Funeral. Maybe never quite got their due either in that regard. They put out some very, very solid albums. I mentioned Kiss the Goat and I think I might have mentioned Enter the Moonlight Gate. Unholy Crusade was a great record. The Seal of Belial was very good. Nocturnal Beast was fucking fantastic. That came out in 2005, and that was on Regain Records. I remember getting sent that promo and just being so surprised by how good it sounded, especially because, for a period of time, bands in that era were just not putting out their best and their most inspired work, but clearly the Lord Belial guys were most definitely inspired, and it sounds like that's not gone away. They are all nearing or in their 50s, and they still seem on fire for the devil. This is fucking excellent. Love the way that the song sets up to this melodic piece that we just paused on now. I think the vocals sound fantastic. I think just everything there works. Great production. It sounds rough, but it also sounds quite, quite clear and quite. How could we say that? There's a sound stage that sort of wraps its arms around you rather than just some bright fucking bass or guitars that glare in the face. So yeah, really like this. I think, as a matter of fact, this probably deserves a top notch, my friends. Let's give it another 60 seconds. Warms the cockles of my heart that a band like this has been going for 33 years. I mean, they did take a little bit of a break after 2009, but they've been going for 33 years, and they're still producing absolute tier 1 music. So, yeah, good stuff there. Very, very good stuff, as a matter of fact. Hexvessel, I've got another new song out as well. We listened to the previous single a couple of weeks ago, and I really like that. It says here, Finnish shapeshifters Hexvessel reveal a nocturnal visualizer for Night's Tender Reckoning. The next advanced single taken from their upcoming 7th LP, Nocturne, due for release on Prophecy Productions on June the 13th, 2025.
And 500 years old are joined in their burial to all skeletal souls, effigies immortal.
Something about Hexvessel that I've noticed on these newer songs, there's definitely a move back towards the avant-garde sounds of some of the earlier records. And there's more of an emphasis on the atmospheric and kind of almost neo-folky stuff rather than on Polar Veil, their 2023 record. Polar Veil I felt was a more straightforward record than what I'm hearing coming off of Nocturne so far. And this is only the second song I've heard off of it as well. But I do like it very much. I mean, the one thing that this band has a real knack for doing is building you up to a chorus that is just such a payoff for whatever came before. Great example, on the Polar Veil record, the song Eternal Meadow, it has this incredible swelling crescendo at the end that is, just fucking phenomenal. And it kind of feels like they've gone for something similar here as well. Really nice production as well. Very, very, very good singing. I think Matthew McKerney's vocals are always very good, but it feels like he's taken a step up. Certainly the recording of his voice feels more high fidelity than it felt to me on Polar Veil. But I think this is another thumbs up for me. I concede it will not be for everybody. If you had goosebumps listening to the Lord Belial single, I enjoyed that as well, obviously, but if you had goosebumps listening to that, and that tends to be the only sort of thing that you listen to, then potentially Hexvessel is not for you. But I do like it very, very much. All right, let's get on to some more music. Cryptopsy are releasing a new studio record in June. This is reasonably hot off the heels of their previous album, and actually they did something really weird with this as well. They nuked all of their social media, including the Matt McGache's Vox and Hops podcast channel. Like, literally just deleted every single thing. And how I noticed that was I saw a notification coming up on my phone saying I've been removed as a collaborator on the Into the Necrosphere episode where I had Matt on the podcast. And I thought, what the fuck? Like, am I being blocked? Is old Jackson being hated on? But turns out that this was all part of a publicity stunt to attract attention for the new material. This, of course, is going to be their first record being put out on Season of Mist. Seems like everybody is super excited about it. And actually, the buzz on the socials is that this new track is probably one of the best things that they've done in years. We're going to find out about that in just a second. It says here, on June the 20th, 2025, the Canadian death metal veterans Cryptopsy will be putting out their next full-length installment dubbed An Insatiable Violence. Great title for an album. Recorded, engineered, produced, mixed, and mastered at Christian Donaldson's studio by Christian Donaldson. Like I said, coming out on Season of Mist. Let's give it a spin. Now, look, if you checked out of Cryptopsy after None So Vile, will this convince you to give them another chance? Very unlikely. I mean, I know an awful lot of people who really only listen to the first two Cryptopsy records, and basically anything that's not entitled Blasphemy Made Flesh or None So Vile, they completely dismiss. I am not that kind of Cryptopsy fan, as you all know. I've spoken about this at length. I even enjoyed... I kind of joke and say to my great shame, but I'm not ashamed about it. I even enjoyed The Unspoken King. I fucking loved As Gomorrah Burns, their previous album, and I think this just steps up the chaos, the aggression, the heaviness, manyfold. I mean, yeah, this is top notch, without a doubt. If you like great modern death metal that is played frenetically, with unbelievable technical dexterity, but still with everything done in service of an actual song, as opposed to just showing off how well you can play your instruments. These guys are fucking top of the pile. And very interestingly, Olivier Pinard, the band's bassist, he quit Cattle Decapitation, which I thought was an interesting move, because I would assume that Cryptopsy certainly wouldn't make nearly as much money as Cattle Decapitation. So if you base the decision entirely on career prospects and on the ability to sustain yourself from a band, not necessarily that I think the Cattle Decapitation guys live the life of Riley, but you know what I mean. Like, if you were going to choose which band is the most financially lucrative, I would have suggested he probably stick with Cattle Decapitation. But clearly, Olivier believes in Cryptopsy and believes in what they're doing. I salute him for it, because I think this is fucking brilliant. So once again, I will repeat, this gets a top notch without a shadow of a doubt. Very, very much looking forward to the next Cryptopsy record. All right, one more track, and then we'll do a little bit of probing, a bit of discovery on maybe Metal Injection or Lamb Goat. We'll see what comes up that's interesting. Cadaver have revealed a new single. It's called From the Past. Prior to the official release of their oncoming full-length effort, Hymns of Misanthropy, Norway's Cadaver recently put out another new track in preview called From the Past. Really like that previous Cadaver song. It's definitely something a bit different and quite a lot to get your teeth stuck or sunk into, to fully appreciate the song. But I liked it, so I've got high expectations of this one too. Tell you something, the lyrics could do with a bit of polish. I mean, it sounds like the ramblings of a 12-year-old, but the song itself, great. The title From the Past is perfect because it has a very, very knowing, it's kind of winking at you very knowingly, saying like we're just basically going back into the archives and probably drawing from either their earliest inspirations or their earliest releases. But it has a very retro feel to it, but it's a retro feel that's kind of done in a way that's affectionate. And if you were following me on YouTube as I was listening to this, you would have noticed the smile on my face. You just can't help but smile listening to this. If we take the difference between Death Commander and Cadaver, I mean, Cadaver, I think, they're not necessarily drawing from inspiration from a particular band or trying to make music in the spirit of a particular band. They're doing it more in the spirit of a particular era. But this is done with so much finesse and so much class, and just it's executed perfectly. This is a great example of what... I mean, I would assume there's probably a 20, 25-year age gap between the Cadaver gang and the guys in Death Commander. That's what 25 years worth of experience does for you, my friends. So, thumbs up for me, no question. Okay, over on Lamb Goat, Kerry King performs Rise for the Night live at WWE WrestleMania 41 Night 2. There's also stories here on the forum of Pope Francis passing away. I am devastated for one, as you can probably tell. We mentioned Olivier Pinard exiting Cattle Decapitation, and then Behemoth live streaming their sold-out show in Poland. I don't really give a fuck about that. I will confess, though, as much as I didn't care about seeing Behemoth headline at Inferno, I had a bit of FOMO seeing Cheyenne and everybody else pass their photos along. I know he's got some really really good interviews in the bag, including one with Swartolf, which I think will definitely be awesome. But it was a shame not to be at Inferno this year, and as I mentioned, I'm not going to be at Inferno next year either, because I'm going to South Africa to surprise my mom for her 75th birthday. But who knows? Maybe 2027. Would Gary Holt have joined Metallica if he had gotten the call instead of Kirk Hammett? Probably not, he says. I don't know him well enough personally to be able to make a judgment on that, but I would suggest he's only saying that now because he has just saying probably not doesn't really have any it doesn't have any real life consequences. I think most people in his position at that time would have jumped at joining Metallica. No question about it. More Metallica news on Blabbermouth. Jason Newsted praises his former band Metallica. They bring it every time they play live. Well, not nearly as cool as when Jason was in the band, I would add to that. Dino Cazares disagrees with Burton Bell's comments about Fear Factory members musically locking themselves in a box. Contractually, they lock themselves in a box from what I hear. Metallica plays first concert of 2025. Yawn. Exodus is Tom Hunting on his battle with cancer. I'm grateful for the ability to keep on living. Very inspiring, actually, how he pulled through that, and very, very happy to see him, be healthy and have such a positive mindset about life going forward. And as much as even though I enjoyed the last Exodus album, am I hugely excited about the new one? Not massively, but I think it could still be. I think it could still be interesting. Cannibal Corpse's Paul Mazurkowitz sets records straight. I'm not doing stand-up comedy. D. Snyder sung version of Triumph's Laid on the Line from Magic Power. Yawn. Marilyn Manson shares a cover of Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight. Jesus, fucking slim pickings on I've got to say. Which means it's probably about time for me to sign off for the week. All right, here's one to close us off. Mike Borden of Faith No More says, Mike Patton has gone from being unable to play with Faith No More to being unwilling to do shows with us. It says here, during an appearance on the latest episode of the Let There Be Talk podcast with rock and roll comedian Dean Del Rey, Faith No More drummer Mike Borden spoke about the band's current status 3.5 years after Faith No More scrapped all of its previously announced fall 2021 performances. The gist of this basically is that apparently Mike had cancelled his performances with the band 36 hours before they were meant to be on stage, which, I do feel like, let's take mental health issues and cast them aside for a second. When you've made a commitment to a band, and especially a band of this size that has at least some degree of production, has a crew and, has spent a lot of money and, done a lot of things to get to a point where they can actually go on a tour like this, to cancel on them or to pull out 36 hours before you're supposed to go on stage, that is massively lame. And Mike Patton might be a very, very talented musician. And again, if he's got mental health problems, I certainly hope he's getting the appropriate amount of help and support that he needs. But that's just not the way that a man behaves, in my opinion. Anyway, Mike says here, it came to pass that when the gear was in the truck, when it was rolling to Chicago 36 hours before we were supposed to be on stage, our guy Mike Patton didn't show for the rehearsal. The one rehearsal that we were going to do. And we got to go see him and see what's going on, what the hell's going on here. Our gear's rolling already to the next gig, and it was very clear that he was unable at that point to physically do it. We made the decision, look, we've got to support our guy. It's going to be a shitstorm cancelling fucking 75 shows, but none of us wants to be the guy that breaks his back and forces him to do something that he's not in a position to be able to do. The only argument was, how the fuck do we logistically do this? Because we have to. So they seem to have been very cool about it, but I think where Borden then gets a little put out of, or gets his nose out of joint, and understandably so, is that Patton then starts appearing sporadically with Mr. Bungle. So Borden continues, it doesn't feel great to me. It honestly kind of hurts my feelings a little bit, but that's personal. That's a private thing. It's business. We were never going to force somebody to do something that they weren't able to do. And now, as I say, it looks like it's really more about being willing to do it. Borden clarified that he's grateful for what Patton has given to us. I mean, we're blessed to have been blessed by such a gigantic, enormous talent. And the future, I don't know. Will he be willing to do stuff or not? It's not for me to say. Doesn't sound like that is going to be the case. And again, as I said, I mean, the dude might be massively talented, but you just don't treat your comrades like that. And equally, a man meets his obligations, whether you want to or not. There's fucking plenty of days where I don't feel like getting out of bed, or I'm stressed. I don't feel like going to work. I drag myself out of work in any case because I know that the old mental health excuse is only going to carry so much weight, and before I'm either replaced. Or life gives me the ass kicking I've got coming to me. Again, I'm not saying this because I don't have any sympathy for people with mental health problems. But what I am saying is sometimes you need to fucking grit your teeth and you need to just push through it. So I think there's a lot of bands where you're ready to call the reunion, on the day that they announce that they're breaking up. But I think with Faith No More, I suspect we may very well have seen the last of them, which, is fair enough. I think Mike Patton probably has got, problems outside of mental health problems, those maybe substance or alcohol related, whatever it is. I hope he gets the help that he needs. But I think we're done with Faith No More for the time being, and I don't see that situation changing. I am also done with the episode for this week, my friends. So I want to say thank you very much for checking out the show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation that I had with the Daeva gang as much as I did recording it. I will be back next week, guest to be confirmed. But in the meantime, I would like to say to every single one of you, whatever it is that you are doing and wherever it is that you are, my friends, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you bad motherfuckers again next week.